Welcome to our next study in the prophecy series. This probably is going to be the last in the Ezekiel. So we started out with Daniel, which is the major book. If you've not watched any prophecy series of mine until this one, you're fairly new joining it. I would encourage you to go back and read the book of Daniel. That's very, very important. So that's where we started on our prophecy journey, because Daniel is the revelation of the Old Testament, and it has a pretty wide picture. So we started with Daniel. We went through all the book of Daniel, all the chapters, and then we went into Isaiah, Isaiah being the next major prophet and the next one that talks about the prophecy. From there, we went into Jeremiah, and now we're at Ezekiel. So these are going to be the four major prophets. From here, after tonight, we will be going into the minor prophets. Following the minor prophets, we'll head into the New Testament. I'm not sure exactly if I'm going to do New Testament or Jesus, prophetic words, one of those two. Then we'll finish with the book of Revelation. So up to this point, we had been talking about Ezekiel, and we have gone through major prophecies looking at Ezekiel 38, and in Ezekiel 38 we looked at Russia and Ukraine in prophecy, Ukraine being mentioned as Magog, which is a general land area, not specifically the country of Ukraine, but any one of a number of countries that are below Russia, in between Russia and Israel. So that was Magog. So that was chapter 38. Then when we get into chapter 40, we start talking about the dimensions of the temple that will be built in the millennium. There will be sacrifices in the millennium, because there will be people that come through the tribulation, people who get saved in the tribulation. Heading into the tribulation, nobody are Christians because they got raptured. Heading out of the tribulation and into the millennium, we will only have Christians. So some people get saved during the tribulation period, mostly Jews, but not only Jews getting saved in the tribulation. Those people that are alive at the end of the tribulation will obviously move into the millennium. They are not in their glorified bodies, so they are apt to sin. Even though they're Christians, they are apt to sin. In the millennium, which is 1,000 years long, there will also be people being born. People being born obviously still have the sin nature, and so there will be sin in the millennium, and so there will have to be sacrifices that'll be held in the new temple that's built in the millennium. And that was described in Ezekiel's 40 through 42. We looked at Ezekiel 45 last week, and now we're picking up in Ezekiel 47. So verses 6 and 7 in Ezekiel 47, we're going to be going into Revelation 21. So while I'm talking, if you want to kind of look at Revelation 21 and put your finger in there, you'll see as I read these prophecies in Ezekiel, you'll get the gist. If you've read Revelation, you'll know where we're going with this. It'll be chapter 21. So Ezekiel 47, verses 6 and 7. Then he led me back, and when it says he, John is talking about, Ezekiel is talking about God. So God is speaking to Ezekiel here. And so Ezekiel says, and then he, God, led me back to the bank of the river. When I arrived there, I saw a great number of trees on each side of the river. Now this river is formed at Jesus' second coming. Jesus' second coming is considered at the Battle of Armageddon, at the end of the tribulation. So his first coming, first advent, was when he was born as a baby. He comes in the rapture, but his feet never touch the ground. So he comes down. The dead in Christ, those that have been believers and people looking forward to the Messiah that are already dead, the dead in Christ will rise first. then those which are alive are caught up in the air to meet him to be forever with the Lord. That's the rapture. All believers dead and gone, and believers that are actually on the earth when that rapture happens, we have no idea when it's going to happen, because there are no signs to tell us what to watch for just before the rapture. There are general signs that kind of point right now, things are getting worse, and so forth. So the rapture happens, and then the tribulation goes. Through the tribulation period, there will be many signs and wonders. There will be two witnesses that will lead many people to the Lord. There'll be 144,000, 12,000 from each tribe. Jews that become Christians, believe in the Messiah, they are going to go out and witness to Gentiles in the world, and many people will become Christians. Then the battle, they're going to be persecuted. If they don't have the mark of the beast in their hand, they're going to be persecuted. Many of them are going to die and be martyred during the tribulation period. Eventually, all the forces of Satan are going to be gathered together in the Battle of Armageddon. When we get to Revelation, we'll talk about in between times, what's happening in the last 3.5 years. So, but at the Battle of Armageddon, just before the Battle of Armageddon, when Jesus comes back, he's going to be coming back with the saints of heaven. His feet are physically going to touch the earth. That's known as the second coming, and it happens at the end of the 7-year tribulation period. When he sets his feet on the ground, Jerusalem is going to break in half, and it's going to force a valley that runs east to west. We pick up the prophecy in the minor prophet of Zechariah that says, 14:4, that says, on that day, that's the day of his second coming, on that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem, and the Mount of Olives will be split in two from east to west. So the valley is going to go east to west. That is going to form a great valley with half of the mountain moving north and half moving south. I'll have a map for you in a minute. So that's Zechariah talking about what Ezekiel also talked about in verses 6 and 7 of Ezekiel 47. Now let's go. I had mentioned Revelation 21. Revelation 22, make that. So Revelation 22, verses 1 and 2, says, then the angel showed me, now we're talking John. So now John, the apostle, Jesus is showing John, or in this case, the angel showing John. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, as clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb, down the middle of the great street of the city. On each side of the river stood the tree of life, bearing 12 crops of fruit, yielding its fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. So let's zip back. So you see what it says in 2, down the middle of the great street, on each side of the river stood the tree of life, bearing 12 crops of fruit. Now let me zip back and to Ezekiel 47, 6 and 7. And when I arrived there, I saw a great number of trees on each side of the river. So it doesn't say 12 here, but that's what it says in Revelation 22. If we look at the map, you will see at the red dot, and right under the red dot it says Jerusalem, and then you see 2 blue arrows going like that. And that is where the Mount of Olives is going to split. And remember, it said part of Jerusalem moved to the south, part of Jerusalem moved to the north. So that makes the split, which runs east to west. And that's those blue lines on the map. And then once it's split, that's where the river is going to come, from Jerusalem, and it's going to flow out of the city. And in verse 8 of Ezekiel 47, he said to me, this water flows towards the eastern region and goes down into the Arabah, where it enters the Dead Sea. So as you're looking at the map, on your right-hand side, that blue line, you can see it goes from the red dot in Jerusalem into the Red Sea. When it empties into the sea, the salty water there becomes fresh. In previous prophecies, we had talked about many Jews moving back to Israel. As a matter of fact, all of the Jews scattered around the world, right now there are Jews in almost every country, if not every country of the world, there are Jews living there. Well, they are going to be gathered back to Israel at this time. So because there's going to be so many people living in Israel, so many of the Jews, that land could not support it as it is now. So we've already looked at some prophecies that said that the land is going to be healed and there'll be lush vegetation. Here we see that now the waters of the Dead Sea, which don't allow virtually anything, nothing of any size anyway, nothing can live in the Dead Sea. That's why they call it the Dead Sea. But with all this fresh water flowing out of Jerusalem into the Dead Sea, you see in verse 8 here that it says the salty water there becomes fresh. So now it'll have freshwater fish. So now not only is the land being healed and producing lots of produce, it's also producing lots of grazing land for the sheep and the cattle. And now the fresh water is going to also give the food of the fish. Ezekiel 47 goes on in verse 12, fruit trees of all kinds will grow on both banks of the river. Their leaves will not wither, nor will their fruit fail. Every month they will bear fruit because the water from the sanctuary flows to them. Their fruit will serve for food and their leaves for healing. So already we know, if you know anything about plants such as aloe vera plants, you know that those leaves really promote healing. Many leaves promote healing. And as you know right now, especially where I'm recording this in Maine, we only have a short time, a couple of months worth of growing season to grow fruit, and then they lie dormant for another 10 months. But these fruit will be able to be produced every month. Again, remember there are going to be a lot of people moving into that land, so that's why they're going to need all this fruit for the people to eat. Verse 13, this is what the sovereign Lord says. These are the boundaries of the land that you will divide among the 12 tribes of Israel as their inheritance, with 2 portions for Joseph. So we told you that the Jews are going to be coming back to Israel. Now, one of the covenants, the Abrahamic covenant, is broken into 2 parts. Part of the Abrahamic covenant is called the Davidic covenant, and the Davidic covenant says that there will always be a ruler on the seat of David. So in other words, from David's line, the king is going to be coming. The other part of the covenant, Abrahamic covenant, is what's known as the Palestinic covenant. The Palestinic covenant is the covenant that God made with Abraham that promised that he is going to give this land to Abraham's seeds in perpetuity. Ever since the Jews have gone in, and remember he mentioned this obviously long before Joshua led the people into the promised land, the Jews into the promised land. They had come up to it, but because of the sin in the wilderness, Moses and Aaron were not able to go into the promised land, but all the people that were alive at that time, they had to wander for 40 years. Those people all died, anybody over 12 years old, with the exception of Joshua and Caleb, because they came back with a good report. So they wanted to go in and claim the land God had given them. They were basically claiming God's power and saying, yeah, they're big, yeah, they're giants, but God told us to do it, we can do it. The other people were frightened and they voted against going into the land, so that's why none of them went. But the land was promised to Abraham. Ever since they went in, when Joshua and Caleb went in, ended up conquering a lot of the land, they never, to this very day, they never have occupied 100% of the land that God promised to Abraham. Back in Genesis, God told Abraham the boundaries of the land. And to this day, they've never owned that whole boundaries. Now we're in the millennium. Now is when the promises from God to Abraham are going to be fulfilled. It's the Palestinic covenant. It's the land that they are going to get. So that's what we're looking at in this section. So he says, this is what the sovereign Lord says. These are the boundaries of the land that you will divide among the 12 tribes of Israel as their inheritance, with 2 portions for Joseph. So the double portion makes 13, because there was 12, but you take Joseph out, that leaves 11, and then you give Joseph a double portion, 2, 11 plus 2 is 13. So now there are 13 tribes because Joseph, the patriarch, got a double portion. We see that double portion promised in Genesis 48:5. Now then, your 2 sons born to you, this is Abraham, God's talking to Abraham. Now then, your 2 sons born to you in Egypt before I came to you here will be reckoned as mine, Ephraim and Manasseh. So God is just saying, these are my children. They will be mine, just as Reuben and Simeon are mine. So basically, he's saying they're all mine. Okay, so Joseph is going to get the double portion. This will play out in the next chapter. So if all the Jews are coming back to Israel, the land is going to have to be healed to feed them, including fresh fish. We talked about that. Verse 22, you are to allot it as a inheritance for yourselves and for foreigners residing among you and who have children. You are to consider them as native-born Israelites. Along with you, they are to be allotted an inheritance among the tribes of Israel. These are Gentiles that got saved during the tribulation. So he's saying, where it says foreigners, those people are the Gentiles that got saved, the non-Jews that got saved during the tribulation. And so they've got to live somewhere in the land. So what he's saying is here, you're going to give them an allotment with the tribes of Israel. Revelation 7:9. After this I looked, and again this is John because now we're in Revelation. After this I looked, and there was before me a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. They were wearing white robes and were holding palm branches in their hand. These are children. Children are born during the millennium. They are those that got saved during the tribulation, and they're gonna be coming back with Christ. But now John is looking at those that are coming into the land. All the tribes are here. None are lost. For some people, and I don't know where they get this, but some people contend that there are lost tribes of Israel. Well, depending on who you're asking lost. To me, they're all lost, because I don't know where any tribes are. But they're not lost to God. God knows where they are. He's going to call them back from the nations that they are at. So there are no lost tribes. So if you've heard people talking about the lost tribes of Israel, not so. The Mormons, and I don't want to get into too much of the Mormon history, but supposedly Joseph Smith got some tablets from an angel called Moroni, and Moroni told him that the 2 lost tribes of Israel were the Native Americans in the United States. And so, and that's, the Mormons believe that those were the 2 lost tribes, and they have some kind of history that's not based on any facts or any other historical evidence other than this angel Moroni getting the words and giving them to John Smith. But there are no lost tribes of Israel. Although in Revelation 7, there is no Dan or Ephraim. We're going to look at that in a minute. Judges 17 through 21 talks about apostasy and idolatry of those 2 tribes. So Dan and Ephraim were the prime progenitors of idolatry and apostasy. If those are, I'm pretty sure you know what idolatry means. Going after idols that are not God. Most of the time we looked at it in the Bible, and they were talking about carving things out of wood or making things out of stone. That's not what we look at today as far as idolatry, but basically idolatry is anything that you put first before God. It can be money, it could be sex, it could be your job, it could be yourself, it could be fancy cars, whatever. I mean, there's really no end to idolatry, and different people idolize different things. So idolatry, you got a pretty good idea on what that is. Apostasy. The word apostasy means somebody that once knew the truth and fell away. most most non-believers are not apostates. They never believed to begin with. They were never saved. But these are people, and this is not people losing their salvation, because this is Old Testament. So these are people that were, in this Judges that they're talking about, they were believing Israelites at the time. They followed God, and then they fell away. They went into apostasy. They started worshiping Baal and at the Ashtaroth pole, and I'm not going to get into all the gods of the Amorites and the Moabites and all that. But Judges 17 through 21 said that the true tribes that were most guilty of that were Dan and Ephraim. To maintain the 12, it is Levi and Joseph, and I'm going to show you here. So the 12 tribes include Levi and they include Joseph, because they are part of the 12 children of Isaac, or Israel. So now in Ezekiel, I'm going to show you the tribes, and these are not land allotments. Okay, so if we look at Ezekiel 48 and these verses, so in Ezekiel 48, verse 1 mentions Dan, verse 2, Asher, verse 3, Naphtali, so forth and so on. Verse 4, it mentions Manasseh, verse 5, Ephraim, and then all the way down through there. And those are the two tribes of Joseph. So Joseph, if you notice, is missing from the Ezekiel 48 column. Notice that Joseph is not there, because Manasseh and Ephraim were Joseph's children. Joseph was one of the 12 tribes. Manasseh and Ephraim were not of the 12 tribes. They were children of Joseph. So we took Joseph out and we put Manasseh and Ephraim in. That is the double portion that we were talking about. So Ezekiel has 13 tribes. Ezekiel 48 lists 13 tribes because there's a double portion for Joseph. Revelation is not an allotment for land. Ezekiel 48:31 says, the gates of the city will be named after the 12 tribes of Israel. So these are the gates of the city. Revelation 21:12, it had a great high wall with 12 gates and with 12 angels at the gates. On the gates were written the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. So we're talking about two different things. That's why there are two lists. One of them is the land allotments that God promised the descendants of Abraham. The other is the 12 gates that are named after Israelites. So that's why they're different. One is land allotments, the other is not. The 12 gates were never promised. There's no prophecy, there's nothing written in there that one of the gates in the millennium is going to be named after the 12 tribes. That promise does not appear in the Bible, but the land allotments do. Let me show you the map. So again, here in Ezekiel 48, the first thing we look at is Dan, and there is Dan in the far north. These are actually going from north to south. So the way Ezekiel lists these, you're going to see them from north to south. So Dan is up in the top, Asher is below that, there's Naphtali, then there's Manasseh, and then there's Ephraim, then there's Reuben, and then there's Judah. I'm skipping Levi for now. I'll come back to it and I'll tell you why. There's Benjamin. Notice that Judah and Benjamin are on both sides of Levi. Then Simeon, then Issachar, and then Zebulun, and then Gad. And so that equals the 13 tribes because Joseph got the double portion. So this is what is going to appear in the millennium. This is what's going to appear in the millennium, and there are the land allotments. And notice that Levi, even though in the original Israel, when they went into the promised land, Levi did not have a land allotment at that time. And the reason they didn't get a land allotment was because Levi was the tribe of priests. So you can't have all the priests in one location, because that means that the other locations would not have any priests. And so what they did is in each land, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, whatever, in each one of the land allotments, when Joshua and Caleb went into the land, each one of the land allotments gave aside a city for the Levites. So that way the Levites didn't own any land, but they had some land that was given to them in perpetuity for the Levites. So that way you could have priests in each one of the tribal lands. So it spread the Levites out. Now we're talking about the restoration of the land. Now we're talking about the millennium. And notice that I haven't drawn Levi. So where is Levi? Here's Levi right there. That red line is pointing to Jerusalem. So it's pretty much kind of in the center, a little south of the center. And that's where Levi's land allotment is now in the millennium. So this is the last slide that I'm going to talk about tonight. But what I want you to see here is that, to the north, where that red line is, right here, District of Judah and going up. So remember I told you Judah was on one side and Benjamin was on the other. So there's Judah and the other north tribes going north. Down here on the bottom, I don't know if you can quite see it on this picture, but this is Benjamin. There's a red line there showing Benjamin. And then Benjamin is on the other side of Levi, and then all the other tribes going south. So that leaves the priest right here in the middle. So this is the area of Levi right here. So it's relatively small, and it surrounds the temple being right here. This is the enlargement of it, but there's the temple. And so the priests and the Levites lived all close near the temple, so they could minister in the temple. They could do the sacrifices and things like that. So they were right there in the middle.
Is that going to be during the millennium?
This is during the millennium. Yep, this is during the millennium. They will be there because there will be, there's no temple for eternity. And once the new heaven and the new earth comes down, which is at the end of the millennium, so the Battle of Armageddon is the boundary of the tribulation going into the millennium. It's the Battle of Armageddon. And then you go into the millennium, and it's 1,000 years. And then towards the end of the 1,000 years, or I should say at the end of the 1,000 years, Satan is let loose. There's going to be one more temptation for a little season. It doesn't say exactly how long that is. And then eventually he'll be caught, chained, and cast into the abyss. And then at that time, because Satan was walking around, Satan had been in heaven. Right now, Satan is in heaven accusing us, the brethren. And so because Satan was on the earth, because Satan had a time when he was in heaven, both the heavens and the earth are going to have to be cleansed. So that is going to happen in between the millennium, at the end of the millennium, after he's caught, thrown into the abyss. And then there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. And once there is a new heaven and a new earth, now there is no more temple, because God is the temple. We looked at it earlier it was in Revelation 21, so we'll look at it again. But we said that that God is now dwelling with man. And the word actually in the Greek is tabernacling. So God is now in the future tabernacling with men. So in other words, there is no temple. The temple is where he lived when he came down, when people were here. We're going to be in the presence of God. We're going to be in the presence of Jesus when we get to heaven, eternity. And we'll be coming and going. And so there won't be any temple, because God himself will be the temple. There'll be no need of sun or moon, because the glory of God is going to light the world. And we'll look at those things more. But just understand, this is how we know this is in the millennium, because the Israelites have got their land allotments. That was what I showed you before. There's your land allotments in the millennium, so that has to be in the land in the future because it never has been done so far. And because it has the temple in it, it can't be eternity. So there has to be this time period in between. So that is going to close out our book of Ezekiel and our major prophets in the Old Testament. When we come back next time, we'll be taking a look at, I believe it's Obadiah, that opens our minor prophets. And most of what the minor prophets have are supporting references. I don't believe, may be mistaken, don't hold me to this, but I don't believe we're going to learn anything new in the minor prophets, nothing that we haven't heard of before. So it'll reinforce. Obviously, in this lesson, we heard Zechariah. He's one of the minor prophets. We'll hear from him again. We'll be talking about Joel and the latter days when the Spirit is poured out. We know in other Zechariah that there were other prophecies, and so we will look at the minor prophets next time. So thank you for joining me on this trek through prophecy in the Old Testament. Next time, minor prophets. If you want to scan through the book of Obadiah, which is not too big, see if you can find the prophecies that concern the second coming, the millennium heaven, not the first coming of Jesus, but the second coming. So thank you very much for joining me. If you have questions, if you would like a set of written notes, you can always write to me at scarboroughfreebaptist@gmail.com. That's scarboroughfreebaptist@gmail.com, or you can look for us on your YouTube channel. Thank you. Have a blessed day.